So we're in the middle of chapter 8 of First Kings, and Solomon has just prayed a prayer of dedication of the temple. It's been filled with the glory of God when they brought the ark in. There's all this amazing commotion going on and celebration. And in verse 54, this is the end of his prayer. It came about, chapter 8, verse 54, and it came about that when Solomon had finished praying this entire prayer and supplication to the Lord, he arose before the altar of the Lord from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread toward heaven. So he'd been kneeling on his knees praying this prayer. In verse 55 it says, and he stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel with a loud voice, saying, blessed be the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promise which he has promised through Moses his servant. So here he's once again saying God's made all of these promises. They've been fulfilled. Look what's happened in this nation. We've come from just one man who was obedient, who had a son through a woman who was 90 years old, and now it's become this multitude of people. And look, God has fulfilled all of his promises. He's brought us into this land. Now his presence is dwelling among us in this temple. We have a multitude of people. God's done it all. And so he's done everything he said. And so here's the affirmation of God is the God of Israel. He's taken us out of, he's proven himself. And as we see who God is, what we have in the Old Testament is a record of how God reveals himself through his dealings with a nation that we could eventually call Israel, the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. And so God reveals his nature, his character, who he is, through his dealings with this nation. And so we see here, what do we see? God's faithfulness to a people according to his promise, even when they've gone through all these different, amazing, wild experiences. That God sees the end from the beginning. He's looking at the situation. He knows what's up ahead, and he knows that he's going to bring it to pass. I think the key verse for me in this in the New Testament is, I'm confident of this one thing, that he who began a good work in you shall complete it unto the day of Christ Jesus. So did he start a good work in Israel? Oh, yes, he did. Is he going to complete it? I believe he is. I believe he's going to complete it in even that nation of people, because that's who he made it to in the first place. It's been expanded. The gospel's been the record that, hey, now peoples of every nation can come in. And that was alluded to throughout the Old Testament also. So we get to chapter 9, verse 2, and it says that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. So here, Solomon has a second appearance of the Lord, and what happens at this one? In verse 6, it says, but if your sons shall indeed turn away from following me, shall not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I set before you, and shall go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them, and the house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, so Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. So, the warning's coming here because God knows what's going to happen. But he also, we'd already seen the petition of Solomon that if this happens, Lord, won't you have mercy on us? In verse 8, it goes on to say, and this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone who passes by will be astonished and hiss and say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? And they will say, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and adopted other gods and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this adversity on them. So the thing the Lord appears here and says to Solomon is, if the people turn away, I will reject them. And we see that, of course, this comes to fulfillment. Yeah, I'll reject them. The house will become a heap of ruins, all of this stuff. They've just gone through this glorious thing. And unfortunately, the future out there is not going to be good, because it's man's nature to just forget the blessing of God so quickly and turn to other things and want more. It's like, kids saying, I'm bored. I'm bored. And so what do? You take them to Six Flags. They have a great time, and on the way home, you know what they say? I'm bored. How quickly we forget, the blessings and the fulfillment of things. It happens on a regular basis. So there's some interesting things in the meantime here that go on. But then a famous story about the Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba shows up in chapter 10. And I just want to look at verse 6. It says, then she said to the king, it was a true report which I heard my own in my own land about your words and your wisdom, speaking to Solomon. And Solomon's wisdom is known throughout the inhabited earth now, at least that area. Nevertheless, I did not believe the reports until I came and my eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. You exceed in wisdom and prosperity the report which I had heard. How blessed are your men, how blessed are these your servants who stand before you continually and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you to set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. So here the Queen of Sheba comes. Here's Solomon's wisdom, says, man, I couldn't quite believe it when I heard it, but half of it wasn't told me. Just the wisdom that came out of Solomon. So wonderful. This is like the highlight. This is like the pinnacle of Solomon's reign. And then we get to a time where Solomon turns away from God. In chapter 11, basically how it comes is he is enticed away by women from other nations that serve other gods. And he marries hundreds of wives, brings them in. He's influenced by these foreign gods from these foreign lands. And so what happens is, anytime this happens, the protection of God fails too, and adversaries are raised up against Solomon. So those are the chapters you'll find in the middle of the book here, and in verse 36 of chapter 11 it says, "But to his son I will give one tribe." So God's saying, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you, Solomon. I'm going to take the kingdom away because of your sin. But it's not going to happen during your lifetime. I'm going to have mercy on you for the sake of David and for the sake of my covenant. But in verse 36 it says, "But to his son I will give one tribe, that my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem, the city where I've chosen for myself to put my name." God has a real covenant relationship with Jerusalem, with that people, with that city. He says, for David's sake, because of what David did, I'm going to give one tribe to your son, who turns out to be Rehoboam, Solomon's son, who becomes king in Israel, and he only becomes king over two tribes. Judah, the tribe he's in, and he's given one more tribe, Benjamin, who serves under the kingdom of Judah. So that promise is made, and then Solomon dies. The end of chapter 11, then the rest of the Acts, verse 41, of Solomon, and whatever he did in his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon? Thus the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of his father David, and his son Rehoboam reigned in his place. So Solomon dies. We're in chapter 11. This is the end of the reign of Solomon as far as 1 Kings deals with, and Rehoboam becomes the king of Israel. Now it gets real confusing here because these guys got real similar names. Rehoboam becomes king in Israel. He takes some really bad counsel from his young buddies about how he should treat the subjects in his kingdom. And he becomes very harsh with them. And there's a breakaway, and the kingdom is divided, just as God said. And 10 of the tribes affiliate with the north and under a man named Jeroboam. So you got Rehoboam in the south, he's ruling over Judah and Benjamin. You got Jeroboam in the north, which is called then referred to as Israel for the rest of this time. So the kingdom is divided. Rehoboam, because of his foolishness and in what he says and how he should treat his subjects, the rest of these 10 tribes pull away. And God, in his faithfulness, though, keeps one other tribe besides Judah, which Rehoboam is in. Benjamin is given to him, and he rules over them. So we're going to divide here that this is the end of basically of Solomon's reign. We're going to transition here, and we're going to get to Ahab here in our next session.